assess how exactly you know when you don't know. Like think about this for a second. How would you actually train someone to know when they don't know? Like I have to do this if I'm teaching somebody how to be a news reporter, and people's minds tend to leap into certainty and they think they've got it and they think they've got the solution to the thing and they've finally found the truth. This is going on all over the place on the internet. I mean, there should be a sign or like a little thing that comes up on the screen every time you open up a browser, or Twitter or Instagram or something like that, that says, "Welcome to the internet. Make sure that you know when you don't know." Well, most people on the internet don't know when they don't know, and this causes a lot of problems. And it's especially problematic when they don't know when they don't know, but they are absolutely compellingly certain that they absolutely know what's going on, and this creates a huge amount of problems on the internet. Hello and welcome to a new exciting edition of Planet Waves TV. I am Eric Francis Coppolino, your friendly neighborhood astrologer, here with a special edition about Mercury retrograde, wherein I will attempt to tell you everything that I have learned about Mercury retrograde since observing this phenomenon, since the days I was working as a cub reporter in the Echo Sentinel office in sleepy Warren, New Jersey, where our editor was an astrologer. Her name was Flo Higgins. And we staff writers of the Echo Sentinel, plus some people scattered throughout the company, were the only people who knew what Mercury retrograde was. And that's because there was an astrologer in our mix, that being Flo Higgins. But most newspaper chains don't have an astrologer working for them. And by astrologer, I don't mean to say that she wrote the horoscope column. As far as I know, the publishing group that published the Echo Sentinel, Burnsville News, and Hunterdon Review, and all those, never, ever once published an astrology column by Flo Higgins or by me or by anyone, but Flo was an astrologer and also the editor of the Echo Sentinel. And so any staff writer who came to the Echo Sentinel would be immediately indoctrinated in astrology starting on day one. And for me, that meant sitting down at a desk in the Warren Township office, assigned to cover things like the Warren Town Board and the Sewage Authority and the Planning Board. And there was an astrology calendar hanging right above my desk. I was staring at it all day long, wondering what all those little triangles and squares were. And among the information contained and on that calendar and coming from Flo Higgins on a regular basis, meaning like every hour or so, were updates about astrology. And of course, she could terrorize the entire publishing organization with her warnings and admonitions about Mercury retrograde. To make matters better, or for that matter worse, there was a production manager of the company, and by production manager, I don't mean some like teenager standing there with an iPad. I mean the guy who could take apart the printing press and put it back together with the papers on deadline. We had the printing press was in a kind of a garage behind the company, in a kind of a warehouse, and there was one guy named Jim who could take it apart and put it back together, and he could program all the computers and all that. And he had hanging on his door a message Xeroxed out of Debbie Kempton Smith, Secrets from a Stargazer's Notebook, which I knew because I found it years later. Don't sign, don't buy, Mercury is retrograde. Now, Jim was Irish, Flo Higgins was Irish, and there may have been some kind of an Irish conspiracy to kind of teach everyone astrology at this company. Don't sign, don't buy. We've all heard that. But the thing going on, well, largely with Mercury retrograde, is that people blame everything on Mercury retrograde. That something goes wrong, oh, Mercury must be retrograde. And then you'll hear them say things like, wow, Mercury is always retrograde. That's what the skeptic says. And in a sense, that's true. While Mercury is not exactly always retrograde, it is in some form of the retrograde, which I'm going to have to calculate live for you here using my super mighty iPad, because there's two data points that I forgot It's hard to keep everything straight for these things. You never quite know what you're going to be talking about. So I may pause the video for that, so you don't have to see me researching it. Anyway, Mercury is retrograde 3 times a year. The reason Mercury is retrograde 3 times a year is that Mercury's orbit around the sun is approximately 3 times quicker than that of the Earth. And when Mercury is retrograde, what it is doing, it is passing. My little chart cam is having trouble focusing in on this particular chart. I don't really know why, but even if it's blurry, you'll get the idea. This here is supposed to be the Earth. This here is supposed to be the sun. These are mere representations. This is not actually like a photograph of outer space. It would be black back there and all that. Okay, this is my Mercury ring. I actually have a Mercury ring. Can't really see it too good, but it's got little wings on it. So let's leave Venus out of the picture for now. When Mercury is retrograde, it is passing between the Earth and the sun, like that. And it happens 3 times a year. And since the astrological chart is cast from the viewpoint of the Earth, then that is represented, the overtaking is represented in the astrology chart as Mercury moving backwards in longitude. In one sense, it is an illusion. In another sense, it is accurate relative motion. It's a description of relative motion between the Earth and Mercury. But what the important thing to know is, for any retrograde planet, it is going to be nearer to the Earth. So this includes outer planets. I don't have a diagram of that, but when a planet such as Mercury is retrograde, that means it is close to the Earth, and it can go all the way out and around and go back behind. And when it's back behind the sun, it's not retrograde, and then it comes back, and it is retrograde. So what we've got now are both Venus. We'll let this one be Venus. It should be red, but whatever. Well, Venus and Mercury are passing in between the Earth and the sun, and that is why we have Mercury and Venus retrograde. They don't always do that. It happens every few years where they kind of are in approximately the same direction in space as from the Earth. And it is happening now at this very exciting time, and I'll get some charts for you. So I've had a lot of time to think about and contemplate Mercury retrograde, and how it works, and whether it works, and why it works, and what exactly is what is going on with this thing here. Let's just let that sit there. It'll focus a little bit easier. We'll leave the Earth in the picture. All right. And by the way, the Earth is flat. I can tell because it just, see that, like it's flat. It's kind of weird. Okay. So the question is, how does this happen? Like, there's no doubt that something happens, but the question is, what exactly is that something, and how exactly is it happening? So there are associations with Mercury retrograde, like delays. Another common factor of Mercury retrograde is things costing more than you think they're going to cost. Another factor of Mercury retrograde is things not working out according to plan, or taking longer than you think that they would take. Another commonly known factor of Mercury retrograde is things breaking down. Another commonly known factor of Mercury retrograde is, well, my personal favorite, information coming out. So I've had the ability to test all of these things and to see actually what goes on. I've even done things like make major purchases. Well, not major like a car, but major like sound equipment, to see what would happen. And in one mysterious case, I had I believe it was like a Sony D5, a very, very good portable cassette system, and a AKG XY stereo microphone, and the whole thing eventually just disappeared. It worked, but then I think someone took one unit during a move, and then the microphone disappeared for like 20 years, and finally it came back. Other things that happened during Mercury retrograde are, for example, like back in the day when there were checks. There used to be these thing called checks that were a little piece of paper with numbers and letters on them, and then you can go to the bank and trade them in for money. A check might, for example, get stuck in a magazine, because there were these things called magazines, which were like stacks of paper with binding, and they were glossy paper, and they had like pictures of like strawberry parfaits and nearly naked women and men riding horses and things like that. And so sometimes in this thing called the mail, which was like paper that like a guy in a uniform would bring every day, like he'd be pushing this little cart, and he'd have like this bag of stuff, and then he would stop right in front of your house, and he would put things through like this little opening in the door, and it would push things through. And sometimes the envelope with the check would get stuck inside the magazine, and then you think, oh, the check didn't come. What happened? The check didn't come. And then like you get a new check, and that would take like 3 weeks, and then you'd open up the magazine one day and you'd be like, oh, there's the check. Okay. So that kind of thing. And also things not working out according to plans, and also, like your engine blowing a head gasket. All of these things are associated with Mercury retrograde. And the question I always had is, well, okay, I've noticed these things, but what does the check getting stuck in a magazine have to do with your head gasket blowing up? Like what I don't get. There had in my I have an Aquarius moon. Everything has to make at least some sense. What's the connection between the check and the head gasket blowing, or whatever it may be? The New York Times occasionally does something interesting, and one day, maybe about 10 years ago, they did a feature on Mercury retrograde. And the feature involved calling up, they got, because they're the New York Times, when the New York Times is on the phone, everyone genuflects and does exactly what they're asked. So they called up Metro North. That's a train company. Trains are these things that are like long things with like a lot of windows and seats on the inside, and then and then you connect them together and they go down on tracks. And so they called up Metro North, and they asked if there were more delays during Mercury retrograde. So they picked a period when Mercury was retrograde, and they picked a period when Mercury was not retrograde, and the railroad, I'm sure quite happily provided an analysis that said, actually, in fact, no, there are no more delays statistically reported during Mercury retrograde as when Mercury is not retrograde. So this was a clue. Now, for this investigation to be accurate, you basically need to do it like 10 times in different parts of the world, and they should all pretty much say the same thing. But for the sake of discussion, let's just assume that this investigation was correct. And New York City is pretty busy. Metro North is a pretty big train company, and they had a lot of data to work with. It wasn't like there was one train a day, right? We're talking like hundreds of trains a day. So let's pretend for a second that there are in fact no more delays with Mercury retrograde than without Mercury retrograde. Okay. Well, then what's going on? Mercury retrograde also manifests in the check in the envelope. If I had been planning, I'm still new at this, I would have been able to demonstrate this. It would have been extremely exciting. I would have had an envelope and an actual magazine and taken the thing out and said, look, this is what it looks like when you find the check in the magazine. But that too is associated with Mercury retrograde. Well, what's going on? What's going on here? So it started to occur to me to test the theory that Mercury retrograde really is about how we respond to things more than anything. And that can include preparing for when things may be a little bit trickier and more challenging. But mostly the Mercury retrograde response is a kind of rushed and frustrated response to things that is an inappropriate response under the circumstances, which may call for a calm, cool approach, and instead what you get is a problem arises, and then there's a kind of a rushed and frustrated approach to the solution, and then that tends to compound problems. So that is my main theory. The second theory that I have is, and this comes from doing a lot of journalism during Mercury retrograde phases. Since I am a journalist somewhat independent of the work that I do as an astrologer, meaning that not all of my stories involve astrology and the observation of astrology, but you can be sure that I'm always looking at the astrology. I'm watching it every day on a program that more or less displays this kind of thing, that and now this too is blurry, a program that displays this kind of thing. And so I always have a sense of what is going on. And one of the things I've noticed during investigations, which is a thing that I kind of use as a utility and as a tool, is that as Mercury approaches its stationary point, which we'll go over those in a second, stationary retrograde and especially stationary direct, that it would seem to me that either something in my mind acknowledges something, or there's some rejiggling of the dimensions, and then information comes out in somehow. But one of the things I know to do is to use Mercury retrograde phases to interpose a delay where I am waiting for additional information. So one of the problems with taking action during Mercury retrograde is simply not that things are predestined or fated in some way to go wrong, but rather that the taking action, particularly initiating something new during Mercury retrograde, is a possible indication of working with partial information. Now, there's one thing about me that makes me a genius. If you're wondering why I'm so fucking smart, that is because I have one skill. I know when I don't know. And if you know when you don't know, no matter how little you know, no matter how little you've read, no matter how many whatever you do, if you know when you don't know, you are a kind of a genius. And if you don't know when you don't know, no matter how smart you are, you're kind of automatically a dumbass. Because the difference between knowing and not knowing is only relevant if you know that you don't know. And even if you know that you know, it is important to have a little bit of uncertainty set aside for, well, maybe I don't know. This is in the... I really work with a kind of a 3-column system. What I pretty much know for sure, what I absolutely know that I don't know, gaps in my knowledge, and then a center column of uncertain which way this will go. And the center column, which is what I call it, especially in my conversations with smart alecky doctors and researchers and investigators, as I'm always encouraging them to keep the center column full. Ooh, here we have another candidate for the center column. We don't know. And the longer you leave things in the center column, the more likely you are to come up with a reasonable explanation over time. They're sitting in this center column of unknown where you can say, nah, I really don't know that. Or you can move it into the column where you're a little bit more certain, and you have over and over again demonstrated or proved that things are a certain way. But implicit in the whole thing is knowing when you don't know. Now, I have a book in progress on Substack called Know When You Don't Know. Know When You Don't Know. Wait, no, it's called, I forget what it's called. But the first chapter of the book is Know When You Don't Know. So this is a very important branch of philosophy called epistemology. How do you know when you know? And by the way, the worst offenders on epistemology are astrology and science. That which passes for science has a very strange way of not knowing when it doesn't know, but just because the person comes out wrapped in a lab coat with a stethoscope, everyone thinks that they know. And astrology has an epistemology problem because astrology doesn't know how it knows. Astrology has a really serious epistemology problem. And unless approached with an open mind and a sense of humor, it's practically useless. So the question, how to know when you don't know, is an epistemological question. And in trying to assess how exactly you know when you don't know, like think about this for a second. How would you actually train someone to know when they don't know? Like I have to do this if I'm teaching somebody how to be a news reporter, and people's minds tend to leap into certainty, and they think they've got it, and they think they've got the solution to the thing, and they've finally found the truth. This is going on all over the place on the internet. I mean, there should be a sign or like a little thing that comes up on the screen every time you open up a browser, or Twitter or Instagram or something like that, that says, "Welcome to the internet. Make sure that you know when you don't know." Well, most people on the internet don't know when they don't know, and this causes a lot of problems. And it's especially problematic when they don't know when they don't know, but they are absolutely compellingly certain that they absolutely know what's going on, and this creates a huge amount of problems on the internet. And here we are. So how do you know when you don't know? You have to constantly be asking yourself, how do I know this? How do I know this? Well, if you keep, that's called fact-checking. Fact-checking, by the way, while I'm here, is not about establishing the truth of something. This is what Facebook made it seem like. We fact-check that and it's not true. No, that is not what fact-checking is. And I can tell you this because I worked at publications like The Village Voice, where there were fact checkers on board, and I would do the story with the editor. We'd agree on the story. I'd submit the copy, and then it would go to the fact checking department, and the fact checking department would attempt to break the story, which meant they would confirm the attribution in the story. So whether something is true or not is beyond the realm of fact checking. But what is not beyond the realm of fact-checking is verifying the attribution. What is your source for that fact, including facts in the article that have no source listed for the fact? The role of the fact-checker is to say, how do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that? Oh, really? How do you know that? Oh, really? Did Mr. Hinchey say that? Okay, is Mr. Hinchey really the congressman from such and such district of New York? And has he really been in office since 1992? And all of this stuff. There are some things that come down to absolute yes or no facts, like what year the congressman took office. But in terms of most other points of fact-checking, this is just about confirming the attribution. Okay, so this gets a good reporter into the habit of saying, how do I know that? How do I know that? How do I know that? And as you're typing your sentence, you might type a sentence that's 15 words, that there's 3 different how do I know that in the sentence. Most people don't bother. They just simply assume they read it somewhere, or they heard it somewhere, or they know that, and that's it. So you can have a lot of fun fact-checking things that you learned as a child, like you'll absolutely certainly find out that the earth is a pancake if you just did. So there's kind of a faux fact-checking going on the internet, where on the one hand, nobody really knows how they know anything because it's the internet. And then on the other hand, you have these people who are like using this motif of fact-checking, but then they're coming up with things like, the Beatles never, ever, once, ever wrote a song. And I know I'll get a comment saying, no, they didn't. It was the Tavistock Institute. Paul McCartney was hypnotized. But how do you know that? How exactly do you know that? The way that I know the Beatles wrote all the songs is because all their recording sessions were logged. And every single song has its provenance, has its story. In other words, how they went to India, they had that was Sexy Sadie was really the Maharishi, and people actually know these things, and it doesn't make them absolutely true, but you have attribution. So if you want to not be a dumbass, then the thing to do is kind of walk around all day asking yourself, wow, how do I know that? How do I know that? And it may seem annoying, but then it's a lot of fun. So when I read an article or a book or something, I always have one of these in my hand. This is what it looks like. This is called a pencil, and they come in several styles actually. Like this is also a pencil. Like there's different kinds of pencils, but I prefer this kind of pencil because it's kind of self-sharpening. And I sit there and read with a pencil in my hand, marking up the text of every single book that I read. I mark it up for things that fill in gaps in my knowledge. I underline and highlight things that I am uncertain about. I will go back and fact check the books that I read. That's why I'm an editor and you're not. But I'm trying to set a good example for you of how to go through your day with the meditation. How do I know this? How do I know this? Is that really true? Have I checked multiple sources on this? Well, with one thing, getting past fact checkers in an organization like the Village Voice is, yeah, if you have multiple sources, you are certainly more compelling. All right, now let's take this away, and then I'll have dramatically say, and now we're going to see a chart for the very moment. Oopsie. Hold your little dogs here. Mercury goes retrograde. Previous one. For when Mercury goes retrograde, March 15th at 2:45 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So overnight, the 14th to the 15th, Mercury will station retrograde. All that means is that Mercury got close enough in between the sun and the moon, sun and the earth. The moon is like this. Between the sun and the earth, that it starts to look like it's going backwards, kind of like overtaking a train, two trains moving side by side. The slower train looks like it's going backwards. It's the same effect. Think on these things. Okay, so when Mercury gets exactly into that position, you can see that it's indicated by a little Rx. And Mercury has been sitting in degree 10. It's 9 and 35, which means it's over 9, which means it's 10. You round up as soon as it gets to 01, right? Because you're in the 10th degree. There's no 0th degree. So Mercury stations from the viewpoint of writing this retrograde, again, 2:45 a.m. Eastern Time on March 15th. That's very early on Saturday morning. And you can see that Mercury is in a conjunction with Venus, which is also passing between the Earth and the Sun, and they are both heading back toward Pisces. And that means they're going to cross this imaginary line called the Aries point, where the tropical zodiac, that is to say the zodiac based on the alignment of the sun, this is 00 Aries, that's called the Aries point, based on the alignment of the sun to the tropics of the Earth. That's the tropical horoscope, right? We're not measuring anything by the stars, except the position of the sidereal vernal point, but that's another story. So everything is measured on a kind of a dial that places it in a 360-degree kind of round map relative to the sun's position at the spring equinox, which is about to happen. We know that it's about to happen because the sun is at 24:56 of Pisces, and that means that just 5 short days from this chart, the sun too will cross the Aries point, and the spring season will begin. Other exciting things are going on. As I have been mentioning, Neptune is about to enter Aries for the first time since 1862. That is what I said in a previous video, but let's just confirm that using this program, IO Sprite. So the last time that So Venus entered Aries April 13th, 1861. That's 3 years before the Civil War. President Lincoln was in office. And then again in October, and then in February of 62. So February of 1862 was the last time that Neptune was in the Aries point. So this is an event on a nearly 2-century scale. It's a pretty big deal, and no one alive has ever experienced it. And Neptune wasn't discovered, was it? Well, when was Neptune discovered? Well, maybe it was. But even if Neptune was discovered, not a lot of astrologers were using it. There wasn't a lot of astrology going on at that time. Most astrologers were just using planets out to Saturn and the sun and the moon and various things like that. So, Mercury goes retrograde, Venus is retrograde. The two of them will retrograde into Pisces. They'll all make conjunctions with Neptune, the north node of the moon, the sun, and Saturn, and with each other today, for example. So there's a lot of conjunctions going on. These planets are all shuffling around. Can't really see my hands there. Here, I'll demonstrate. They're all shuffling around. All right, so that's the chart for the station retrograde. If we look at the chart for the station direct, we find out that happens April 7th, approximately. That's the 15th, 2 weeks, plus 14 plus 7. That's about it's always a little more than 21 days that Mercury is retrograde. And we find out that Mercury has retrograded all the way back to 26 and change Pisces. It does not actually make it does not make the conjunction to Saturn. You can tell because its number doesn't go lower than Saturn's number. If the number went lower or lined up with it, it would make the conjunction. So Mercury stations right out to Saturn, and then it turns around and goes direct. Venus on this day is still retrograde. It will keep going back and then turn around at some point in April. And meanwhile, now the sun is out in mid-Aries, and then we have a big part of the festivities of the spring of 2025 involve this conjunction of Eris here and Chiron here, which actually exactly lines up in May. But the sun passing through the conjunction is going to fully activate the conjunction, and it's pretty hot. When we look back at this time in our lives, we'll find evidence of the Eris-Chiron conjunction going all the way back to like 2023. We'll say, that was the era of the Chiron-Eris conjunction, because these things work in they kind of define subgenerations, basically. Sometimes they define something like a 7-year phase, and the 7-year phase, as defined by the Eris and Chiron in a conjunction, is at its very peak right now. Just as a reminder, also during this Mercury retrograde is going to be this total solar eclipse. That will be the next video that I do explaining this total solar eclipse. But the thing to look at, the big gestalt, is look at this concentration. It's called a locomotive pattern in Pisces and in Aries. And we see it here. Neptune's in Aries, Saturn's coming, and then all this activity in Aries. And also, ever important in Aries is Salacia. That's at approximately 10 degrees. That's the one about be yourself. Be yourself no matter what they say. And then the eclipse is happening. So one defining factor, and I'll end on this note. We're going a little bit long here. One defining factor of Mercury retrograde in terms of how the whole experience is going to shape up is what else is going on during the Mercury retrograde. There are times when there's not that much going on during the Mercury retrograde. There are times when there is a lot going on during the Mercury retrograde, including Mercury and Venus in a rolling conjunction, crossing back and forth between two signs, including the spring equinox, including a total solar eclipse in Aries, and including Neptune changing signs for the first time since Abe Lincoln was president. That would qualify as a lot going on. So keep your head. Pay attention. If you have a problem, maybe delay solving the problem. Don't throw money at things during Mercury retrograde because you don't really know what's going on. And as A Course in Miracles says, let me recognize the problem so it may be solved. And usually when you understand the problem, there is a solution. When you have what you think is a problem and there seems to be no solution, the chances are that you don't actually understand the problem. And if you don't know that you understand the problem, that would be in the category of not knowing when you don't know. So to sum it up, my big motto for Mercury retrograde, having observed, 30 years of professional astrological practice times 3, that's 90 Mercury retrogrades as a pro. And then I had like a big 5-year warm-up as an amateur. That's more than 100 Mercury retrogrades. And that is what I've learned. And to sum it up, I would get it down to 4 words: know when you don't know. All right, promo, the spring reading is finished. That is called Reckoning for the Faithful, or just For the Faithful, or just the spring reading. Check in on all of that and my other excellent products, including personal consulting, at the Astrology.Boutique. Again, Astrology.Boutique. I know boutique is a hard word to spell. It's French. Boutiquue. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your business and your trust, and for being a subscriber and a supporter of the journalism that I do. Please tell your cats and dogs and donkeys I said hello, and signing off from Kingston, New York, I'm Eric Francis for Planet Waves. Bye for now.